true hallucinations.
Okay, good afternoon. This is Adam Sturch broadcasting from the mushroom from the garage art today. Taos, New Mexico still. Working on oil painting, here we are. Alright, today I'm going to start with an overall skin tone glazing, just to give an overall kind of medium tone, to then start modeling highlights and shadows a little more cleanly, and also kind of adjust the coloration. And then I've got the green mixed up from last time still, saved and preserved neatly in a nice little cup, so I'm going to continue with the scales. But firstly, a short session of skin modeling. Zoom in a little bit.
Combine intelligence with hope and not betray one nor the other is the only reasonable position of intellectuals and people steeped in Western tradition and history, one of total hand-wringing, head-scratching despair. This is the official position of the culture, as a matter of fact. Hope is very un-chic, or it was until recently. There is now, I think, a turning of the corner on this issue in the culture. First of all, simply because despair has been done very well by a number of people. The French got there first. Nobody is going to beat them at that game. And we've been at it since 1950. And I think the various positions have now been run through. So is there a reasonable basis for hope? And how deeply do we have to reconstruct the premises of our worldview in order to legitimately believe in the human enterprise, ourselves, and each other? Well, the answer is you've got to go deep. We've been on a bummer for a long time. Western civilization enshrines as its central mystery the law of thermodynamic entropy, which is a huge bring down. It basically says everything falls apart. Everything dissipates into less structure, less order. Everything is fleeting. And from materialism, we've learned to accept the idea that death is the yawning grave, your compost, that's it. A series of very, quote-unquote, existential presumptions have been built in to Western civilization over the past 300 or 400 years with greater and greater ferocity. And this hopelessness is a concomitant to the rise of hierarchical managerial structures in Western society. In other words, a precondition for hierarchical management of society is a docile, confused, disheartened population, stabilized in an economic system that places a premium on low awareness, repetitious, uncreative lives. And this is the kind of situation in which many, many people, more and more people, find themselves. So, because I have an innate intuition that the universe is a more positive enterprise than that, and because I think a fair examination of nature would support this anti-existential position, I sort of wanted to talk about this evening and show how some of the things in my shtick, which are most misunderstood and most misrepresented, are in fact in orbit around this attempt to empower optimism in a domain of believability. I mean, it's easy to be an optimist if you're a nitwit, but to be an optimist and be cool, this is the challenge. It's not easy. I think that our worldview has overlooked two fundamental facts about the nature of reality. And the absence of these two fundamental facts in our models of how the universe works is what has given us such a downward trajectory into factionalism, existential despair, a broken connection to nature and in some cases to each other. Two fundamental things were overlooked. I want to discuss them and then show how the recovery of these things feeds in to a legitimate optimism. Okay, the first thing that science overlooked, and by science I mean the entire Western value package, the science, the politics, the religion, the aesthetics, because it is all derivative of Renaissance science and transformed classical values. What was overlooked was what I call the conservation of novelty. Now, what I mean by this is something very easy for you to convince yourself is happening. The conservation of novelty is simply that over time the universe has become more complicated. New levels of complexity become the foundations for yet deeper levels of complexity. And this phenomenon of the production and conservation of what I call novelty is not something which goes on only in the biological domain, or only in the cultural domain, or only in the domain of physics. It is a trans-categorical impulse in reality, meaning it's everywhere, everywhere. The universe was born in a state of great simplicity. There were no atoms, there were no molecules, there were no stars, there was only a plasmic ocean of energy. The physics for describing this were very simple. As time passed, you could almost imagine complexity crystallizing out of a universe that cools. As it cools, new properties emerge, what David Bohm called emergent properties come out of the universal mix. Atomic systems form. This creates an entirely new domain of matter, different from the plasma that preceded it. As the universe cools, matter aggregates into stars. Stars cook out heavier elements, among them carbon. Carbon sets the stage for four-valent complex polymer chemistry that sets the stage for life. Simple life sets the stage for complex life. Complex life sets the stage for multicellular advanced animals, land animals, so forth and so on. You see what the process is here. It's that each emergent property becomes a building block for a new set of phenomena. The concrescence of atomic systems allows the physical world. The generation of carbon chemistry allows the organic world. The complexification of advanced animals allows the conscious world of human culture and civilization. Now, interesting to note about this is it's fairly obvious. I don't think we have to beat each other over the head with it. It's pretty clear that it's true and that it's happening. Yet science has never joined us in this perception of the obvious. Science believes in evolution, but in biological systems, but defines it as a completely non-progressive process where random mutation meets natural selection And out of this comes an ever differentiating set of forms. But an orthodox evolutionary biologist will be quick to tell you, you mustn't make the intellectual error of thinking of this as progress or advance or movement toward a goal. These are all teleological ideas that science expunged from its evolutionary theory. So biological process is not seen as progressive. And yet, what I'm saying to you this evening is that not only is biology progressive, but it emerges out of an antecedent progressive process, the evolution of physical matter and the physical universe of stars and so forth, and it anticipates a deeper advance into progressive integration in the form of culture, language, human beings, the creation of material culture, the elaboration of the arts and sciences, so forth and so on. Okay, that's I think, fairly obvious. And yet science, by denying it, gives us no arrow of purpose in the felt world of human existence. When you go to the universities and you ask what is history, you will be told it's a trendlessly fluctuating process. Well, this is fascinating. If it's a trendlessly fluctuating process, it is the only process ever observed to behave in that fashion. Processes, by their very nature, have an innate predictability. So that's the first thing that I think science and the worldview derivative of it has overlooked, that from the very birth of the universe, there was a progressive advance into complexity that built on previously achieved levels and adumbrated those levels, brought them to still a deeper expression of novelty and complexification until we arrive at this moment in this city. And I submit to you, this is the most complex moment in the most complex place in the universe to date. Because we have the physical world, the natural world, your basic human world, your basic post-industrial human world, the world of electronic human integration, the world of post-modernity. We are the inheritors of all the complexity that preceded us. Okay, so then that brings me to the second point in empowering optimism of a fairly radical sort. And again, I appeal to your observational intelligence. Nothing is going to be asserted that runs counter to intuition, but what is asserted runs counter to the description of reality that we're getting from science. The second point, it relates to the first. It is this: not only has novelty conserved itself and built on what has been achieved in the past to move toward the future, but, and of the 2 points, this is the more important, each stage of advancement into novelty, into complexity, into concrescence has proceeded more quickly than the phase which preceded it. The universe is in a state of asymptotic acceleration of some sort. And this has been completely ignored, not ignored, denied by science. I mean, science says that everything interesting happened at the beginning of the birth of the universe. In a few very short eras, a number of physical states came and went, a number of sets of physical laws superseded each other. But after a few minutes, the universe settled in to a steady cooling along the lines which we see around us. And then science says that at some unimaginably distant point
all right,
in the
that
future,
significantly helps her angle and the shadows playing across the surface of her face, unlike the lights playing across the surface of her face. It's pretty saturated. I may nitpick a little bit, but I'm going to cut it here and pick up the scales in a little while. Okay, next take. I'm going to zoom in a little on the segment of scales we're working on here.
Not true. We are creating a world that celebrates diversity.
It's decent.
That
all right.
celebrates the uniqueness of every person. The complexification of our species is a process directly dependent on the complexity that we each bring to the process. The diversity that is spreading through society is a concomitant to the boundary dissolution. And I really believe that that science's inability to make sense of human beings in the world as part of nature, to make sense of art, love, hate, aspiration, fear. The failure to make sense of this is the failure to come to terms with the transcendental aspect of reality. We are the best evidence there is that something extraordinarily unusual is happening on this planet, and that it's not something which will go on for millions of years. It began about 20,000 years ago. It's a self-advancing, self-expanding, self-defining process, and it takes no prisoners. You know, there is no going back. There is no going back from the momentum that history has imparted to the human imagination. There is only a going forward into what is called a forward escape through art, through design, through management and integration. We have to push the art pedal to the floor. We have never designed our societies. We have never managed our societies or our lives. We have never tried to make what we were serve an aesthetic agenda. And that's why we've created a mess. In the absence of an aesthetic agenda, what we've created is Animal House on a global scale. So now it's time to pay the piper. And just in closing, the catalyst now is a combination of technology, solid-state technology, and pharmacology. The world that we are leaving behind, the world that failed us, was a world of ideologies and mechanical technologies. And the ideologies, one by one, are going down the tubes. Marxism, Freudianism, fascism, they one by one will be discredited. They cannot sustain. And the mechanical technologies cannot be sustained. They pollute, they dehumanize, they wreck the planet. What is coming into place is a world where drugs replace ideology. That's why drugs are so terrifying to those who oppose them. That's why they say you want to escape. You want to take drugs to escape. That's right. You want to escape. You want to escape fascism, communism, socialism, existentialism, phenomenology, positivism, all of this stuff. You want to escape ideology into the felt presence of the body, which means drugs and sex and syncopated music. And parallel to this development and happening in different sectors of society is the hardwiring of our imagination. the building of databases that we can access instantaneously that make the human past co-present with the now. The boundary dissolution that I'm talking about includes the division between past, present, and future. This is what it means to end Newtonian time. It means that the past, the present, and the future become a coextensive domain where everyone then awakens to the fact, which was always there to be observed, that there is not simply one past. There is nothing called the past. I have a past, you have a past. It's not the same past. Consequently, the futures we are going to are different. We create our own realities as a species and as an individual. And so what we are passing through here in the now, in this lecture, in the 20th century, is a moment of community. A gam, as Melville would say. A gam is where two sailing ships, two whaling ships meet at sea. That's what we have here. A gam, a moment of dialogue. And then we will each go back to our own private Idahos. But the thing to take back to those private Idahos is the awareness that human history secures the central importance of human beings. We are part of the universal
That lemon yellow is still wet.
Adventure. We're
going to be very careful. It's going to be kind of slow. Still, you know,
of universal
brace yourself.
processes and circumstances. We are not ephemeral, irrelevant to each other or to the greater whole. This is the truth of psychedelics that Aboriginal societies have always known, and it's the truth that we had to sacrifice in order to make the prodigal journey into matter. But the prodigal journey into matter has now been concluded. We've found the top quark, we've shut down the super collider. Now we need to go back to the problems of the human soul. And there isn't much time, but the tools that have been put into our hands are the most powerful tools there have ever been. The Gaian connection into the vegetable mind of the planet that we are trying to mirror and hardwire on a human scale. Nature is full of interest and affection for humanity. It's up to us to discover that humanity in ourselves, because we have gone so sour along the rational path, and connect it up with the rest of nature. This is a process which is happening, but it's a birth. It can go with ease because we help it from this side, or it can be traumatic because we resist, and as McLuhan said, insist on driving the automobile of history using only the rear view mirror. That's no way to proceed. We need to wake up, smell the coffee, turn on the light, get loaded, and direct the human future toward a mirroring of aspirations such that we are pleased then to turn the enterprise over to those who follow us. Well, that's that, I think. We'll take a brief, like 15 minutes. I'll sign books. I'll only do signatures because of the shortness of the break. Circulate around. We'll come back and do a half an hour or so of Q&A. Thank you very, very much for coming out today. Nice to see you. Please ideas like that states spontaneously perturb themselves to higher states of order, that order within a system is conserved, so forth and so on. Yes, fractal mathematics is an intellectual revolution, the magnitude of which has not yet been fully appreciated, I think. It's a very, very big deal. It's just that so much is happening in our world that it's very hard for us to know what are the real ethical turning points and what is just flim-flam and hyperbole. But the power of fractal mathematics has carried the human mind to a whole new level. Mathematics was not thought to be a natural science by its practitioners until very recently. It was thought to be an abstract undertaking. But it turns out its most abstract constructions have a curious congruency over population growth, the organization of species in a rainforest, so forth and so on. Yes, there is. The cultural change that is coming is not superficial. It's not simply about club dance styles, fashion, sexual mores. It's about all that. But when it's all over, the mathematics will be different, the physics will be different, everything will be different. This is a major shift in cultural values. You had a question. Do you still want to do it? Oh, number 5. I don't think I really gave it its worth. Basically, number 5 is do not multiply. Replace yourself, but do not multiply. Go forth and multiply. No, go forth and lightly subtract is a better way to do it. I have talked, I don't want to get into it tonight, but I've talked at other times about how if every woman would have just one child, the population of the earth would fall by half in 40 years, and how the women in the high-tech industrial democracies are the most likely to get this message because they're educated, global, concerned citizens, and it is their children who are destroying the resource base of the world, because a child born to a woman on the Upper East Side or Berkeley consumes between 800 and 1,000 times more resources than a child born to a woman in Bangladesh. And, when I talked earlier, I referred to managing and designing societies. One of the things I think we need to talk about that has not yet come out of the sexual redefinition debate is I think that this whole thing about how do we feminize society and women are not getting their fair shake and what do we do about white male dominators and all that and how do we make men more like women and so forth and so on. This is all somewhat cockamamie in terms of the idea that we need to feminize men. We don't need to feminize men, we need to feminize society. And the obvious way to do that is return to Paleolithic sexual ratios, which were probably about 70-30 women to men rather than 50-50. The effort to maintain a sexual balance of 50-50 is some kind of monogamite plot. And it maintains male dominance and a generally masculine character to the enterprise of civilization. If women were 70% of the population, that would quite naturally correct itself.
Gotcha.
In light of your insight into sharing of the
I'm surprised it's going to get.
Well, if your strategy, I've thought of this strategy too, of course, I think any artist does. What do I think of Kurt Cobain's suicide? What is the question? What do I think of Kurt Cobain's suicide? And the answer is, as a strategy for advancing your career, I think you should wait till you're a little bit deeper into your career. Anyway, it was my humble opinion that Primus did it better, and anyway, I like Coil, so let me off the hook here. I'm a house guy, and I wish those people luck, but you're more likely to find me listening to World Without Walls.
I'm a teacher, and I'm interested in this idea of the nature of intuition. I wonder if it would speak to
intuition refers back to this, I made mention of nothing comes unannounced. That's intuition. But the rational mind has a real ability to slough off the intuition. The intuition never shouts. It never grabs you by the lapels. It just says, maybe that airplane looks a little funny, and then you don't get on it and it blows up. So intuition is basically a function of listening. And since it's very hard for people to listen, especially dominator types or opinionated types, I think the key to intuition is to listen. It's just like, the key to nature is to look, I think. I read a wonderful quote last week, I think it was Goethe, said, thinking is better than knowing, but looking is best of all. And I think that's a very psychedelic perception. Knowing is the worst of all. Knowing is a huge drag, and it's a chimera anyway. Nobody knows anything. Don't let them kid you. I mean, we're monkeys here. Let's not lose sight of them. Yeah.
I think you go back to the question of knowledge, and actually, I agree that we start to see the nature of life things with all like these systems, give all the byproducts, hopefully, recycling more efficiently, and it's not like to be honest, we hopefully lost track of that whole stream of flow, and we can really incorporate that, and then when we really consume to designate the last, and we got with each level of human, each new resource around the leader, there is a question of knowledge and complexity, and what we want to know is that we need more than less. So before we say that everyone in the world should have everyone in the world will have a day, that's good, but since you already need more complex alternatively, where the earth, all the physical resources, have to all things, not just the body of the day, we said it's not but also that there's a say about the operation that we have to continue to grow and not only that we might reach a certain point in our education where I'm not considering something will rise out of 10 years, we say this is a lot of chaotic systems when they push to a certain point, all of a sudden, when plasma, which is chaotic, keeps putting more energy into it, all of a sudden, there are all these beautiful hormone machines, which is not unprecedented.
Well, when I say we should stop consuming, I don't for a moment suppose that we're going to live in a world where no consumption takes place. I mean, or we're going to live in a world where population growth is instantly halted. There's more than one way to force novelty out of the system, and simply repetitiously breeding, that's a habitual activity. And it does force a certain kind of novelty, but it's a novelty born of desperation. My notion is that you get much more novelty out of the system if every person is valued, if every person has leisure time and opportunity for education and this sort of thing. The ingression into novelty doesn't necessarily mean an endless expansion of an inventory of available tchotchkes. It means a vertical integration of all of these possibilities. So I think we are going to elaborate more technologies, more connections. There are going to be all kinds of unusual configurations generated, but to simply suppose that we have to continue in the direction we've been going, I think is a mistake. Capitalism is not a human-friendly mean. I mean, capitalism will sell the ground right out from under where you're standing. It has developed a rapacious appetite for its own survival at the expense of human beings. Some means do this. I mean, fascism was a means so virulent to the human agenda that major outbreaks of it, the whole planet halted what it was doing and stomped it out. And now we have residual outbreaks here and there. But in terms of the aggression into novelty, it isn't a matter of human decision. It's happening around the clock. It's unstoppable. The cultural experience is becoming more and more psychedelic as it becomes more and more translinear and post-Newtonian. Literally, society is entering into a kind of hyperspace, or cyberspace, some people call it. I think of cyberspace as the literalization of hyperspace. One is the platonic goal, the other is the human artifact that seeks to realize that goal. But definitely the cascade of novelty has now reached such an intensity that you have to be very lumpen indeed, I think, not to see it happening, especially if you live in a town like this one, for crying out loud. This is the concrescence of the concrescence here. One more, and then we'll call it quits here on the island. His last book? Well, yeah, he died a few years ago. I'm not familiar with that book. I'm familiar with the major works, Understanding Media, Gutenberg Galaxy. What is your question?
I was curious what you thought of the tender that you developed.
I haven't read it, so I can't comment. Such a dud for me to wuss out. I'll take one more question. Yeah, here.
Cyberspace and how we're also evolving towards that eventuality, hyperspace, and you see there's two paths kind of going on with technology and one through psychedelics. And there's two theories of the technology. One is parallel, going along with it, mimicking it, maybe simulation of it, and it could be the wrong path or the correct path.
All right, we got around that bend pretty smoothly. Let's zoom in on that a little bit. We got a long way to go, but you know, pretty happy with the way those scales look. All right. Very tricky to do with the lemon yellow still so wet, but it's moving. So I'm going to take a few minutes and get back to it.
Office, that little enterprise in independent drug marketing caused the deaths of at least 8 people.
Okay.
I'm not afraid of dying.
Onward with the scales.
Sometimes I'm more afraid of living. And that's the real issue. That's the real issue. Keith Richards, the Rolling Stone guitarist, who, as you know, had a significant heroin habit, in his autobiography, Life, he says, well, what was all that partying, heroin, all about? He says, I suppose, he says, it was about the need for oblivion, the contortions we go through just not to be ourselves for a few hours. So the real issue is, why are so people afraid to be themselves? And why do they find life so challenging that they have to escape their consciousness by uptunding it with substances or certain behaviors? Now, that's not a question that either the society at large or the treatment industry really cares to ask. We have our assumptions about addiction, and the most common and prevalent addiction, and that's the one that informs the legal approach to drug use, is that it's a choice that people are making. It's just a bad choice. So if people are making a bad choice, then what do? Then you deter them from it. Basically, it's the punitive parent approach. The kid misbehaves, you punish him. You're not interested in what the kid is actually portraying through that behavior. You just want to stop the behavior. So it's one of heavy, and as you know in this country, extremely heavy legal sanctions. And the result of that approach is, you're probably aware, that the American population makes up 5% of the world's population as a whole, but 25% of the world's jail population. That means that every 4th person in the world in jail is a citizen of the land of the free. And that's a result of this idea that this is all about choices that people are making. The second approach, which is what you might call the medical approach, is that addiction is actually a disease of the brain. And impairs brain functioning and decision making and so on. Now there's a lot of truth in that, of course. But when you ask what causes a brain disease, and if you go to the definition of addiction given by the American Society of Addiction Medicine, well, addiction is a brain disease and caused about 50% by genetic predisposition. Now, what the choice model and the addiction and the disease model have in common, though, as different as they are, and they almost seem antithetical, because if it's a choice, then why are you punishing it? If it's a choice, then why talk about a brain disease? If it's a brain disease, then why punish people? So the two seem contradictory, but they have one thing in common. And what they have in common is that they both take society off the hook. If it's genes that we inherited, or bad choices that we made as individuals, then we don't have to look at what actually happens to people in our culture. We don't have to look at what happened in childhood. We don't have to look at social policies that favor some groups over others. We don't have to look at the history of certain minority groups in this country or in my country, Canada. It's just choice or genes. So, different as they are, both of these perspectives allow us to avert our eyes from some very disturbing social questions and some very painful individual questions. There's only one problem with that approach. Both those approaches, they happen not to be true. Now, if you look at the genetic perspective, let me give you a clear example, a tragic example actually, that's shared by your country and mine, which is the experience of the Aboriginal people here. Now, there were substances said something about that later on. So that you can't separate brain physiology from the environment, and this is true for all of our lives. So you can't separate the mind from the body, as we do in Western medicine, and you can't separate the individual from the environment. And so, what we really need, what we require, is what's been called a biopsychosocial perspective. And biopsychosocial means that the biology of people is shaped and influenced by their psychological and social relationships. And that's really easy to show. So we know, for example, that kids whose parents are stressed are more likely to have asthma. So in polluted areas where there's more asthma, it's the kids whose parents are more stressed who are most likely to have the asthma. And I'm not going to go into the physiology of it, except to say that we actually treat asthma with stress hormones, adrenaline and cortisol. But we never ask ourselves, gee, what's going on? The stress has something to do with it, maybe? Well, what's really going on is that the emotional stresses on the parent are affecting and having an impact on the physiology of the child, including their lung physiology and their immune system. And this goes on all of our lives. Because the more sensitive we are, the more we're affected by the environment. And that sensitivity to environmental influence may be genetically influenced. But that doesn't mean that you're going to inherit a certain disease. It just means that you'll be more prone to be affected by the environment. It's still the environment that shows up and does this or that or the other. Now, in my 50s, when I was 55 or so, when I was the medical coordinator of the palliative care unit at Vancouver Hospital, I was diagnosed with attention deficit hyperactivity disorder. Well, self-diagnosed actually, after somebody in the unit, the social worker, invited me to have coffee with her, and when she told me about her diagnosis, I understood why she invited me to have coffee. And I just recognized myself, and then eventually I was diagnosed by a psychiatrist, and I was given stimulant medication called Ritalin, but that made me depressed, so I took Dexedrine, and I took that for a while. What these stimulant medications do is they elevate the level of a chemical in the brain called dopamine. Now, dopamine is a central brain transmitter, neurotransmitter. I'll be telling you about it in a little while. But what else elevates dopamine levels? So all the stimulants do. What are the stimulants? Well, Dexedrine, Ritalin, cocaine, crystal meth, caffeine, and nicotine. Guess what? A lot of people who get hooked on these substances are actually self-medicating ADHD. So, on one level, in the medical sense, addictions are always about self-medication. Always about self-medication. Now, cocaine not only elevates dopamine levels, it also, like Prozac, blocks the uptake of serotonin. And serotonin is an important brain chemical implicated in mood regulation. People self-medicate depression with cocaine. People self-medicate ADHD with alcohol and marijuana, which soothes the hyperactive brain. People self-medicate anxiety with marijuana or alcohol. People self-medicate social phobias with cocaine and alcohol or crystal meth. People self-medicate PTSD, post-traumatic stress disorder, with opiates. After the foreign adventures that your country seems addicted to, well supported by my country, by the way, a lot of the veterans come back with PTSD hooked on opiates. It's a self-medication. So on one level, addiction is a self-medication. On a narrow medical level, but we have to go beyond that narrow medical model. But we have to recognize what's going on here. In other words, and actually, when I go around speaking about this issue and I ask people, I won't do it now, but I did this afternoon, I asked people, well, how many of you have an addictive relationship to a substance or to behavior? And a number of people put their hand up. And the next question is, and what did it do for you? What does it do for you? Well, it gave me peace of mind. It gave me a sense of control. It connected me to other people. It soothed my pain. That changed consciousness, known and used by the natives prior to the colonization from Europe. There was peyote, as you know, in some areas of North America. In southern United States and in Mexico, there were alcoholic spirits. There's tobacco, known to many of the natives, psychedelic mushrooms, and so on. And as I said, not only were these substances known, they're what they were used. They were used regularly, without addiction. How were they used? Ceremonially. Now, the ceremonial use of a substance is the direct opposite of the addictive use. Because the addictive use is all about obtunding consciousness. It's about going blotto. It's about escaping. It's the contortions we go through just not to be ourselves for a few hours, to quote again Keith Richards. Ceremonial use is to reach a higher level of consciousness. It's to be more connected. It's to be more aware. It's a ritual thing that you engage in the community, not in the isolation of your room and in shame. So it's a very direct opposite. Now, if these people were genetically programmed to be addicted, why was there no addiction prior to colonization? And not only that, even after colonization, you get these very strong alcoholic substances introduced by Europeans. Even then, that didn't lead automatically to addiction. Like the Innu, the so-called Eskimos of northern Canada. They drank the whiskey and they loved it and they were drunk and so on, but they were not alcoholics. They were able to live their lives, go hunting, fishing, maintain their communities, bring up children in a healthy way, until something happened. And that thing that happened is when they lost their right to live their lives the way they knew how to do. So addiction could not have been genetic, because if it was, they should have been addicted a long time ago. So that's the first problem with those perspectives, is that they're not true. Secondly, one way or the other, they make an assumption. And along the many mythologies that bedevil the addiction field is this idea that drugs are addictive. I mean, no, they're not. I mean, let me ask you this question. Is alcohol addictive? Well, if I asked amongst you here how many have ever had an alcoholic beverage, most of you, I dare say, would put your hand up. But if then I asked how many of you had an addictive relationship to alcohol, it would be a much smaller number. If the alcohol was addictive in itself, you should all be addicted. You should all be alcoholics. Most people who try most drugs, whether it's heroin, crystal meth, cocaine, cigarettes, caffeine, alcohol, never become addicted. Therefore, you cannot explain the addiction by the power of the drug itself. Nor can you therefore stop addiction by trying to stop the availability of substances. The real issue is, why are some people driven to addictive behaviors What is it that impels them in that direction? And once they've had that experience, why can't I give it up? Now for that, you have to look at individual lives and social issues in a broader context. You're not going to resolve that one by doing brain scans for people and showing that they've impaired brain circuits, which they do. But how do they get there? That's the question. And what I'm suggesting to you that if the choice model and the disease model are inadequate to the explanation of addiction, then what's really going on? What's really going on is that the central fact about human existence is utterly ignored in mainstream medical theory, which is that the brain is inseparable from the body and the individual is inseparable from the environment. Now that little baby there, every second that I speak, he or she has millions of new connections being formed in the brain. And all that is happening in relationship to the environment. And I'll explain it.
Further ado, I'd like to introduce Dr. Gabor Mate, and I know you're going to have a wonderful evening listening to him, and there'll be great food for thought for you, all of you who are concerned or interested in addictions. So let's give him a very warm welcome.
Thank you, Kaylin and Rebecca. Can you hear me at the back? Okay? Yeah? Great. If there's any problem, just let us know. So thank you for...
Hey, what's up, man? Yeah, dude, how's Callie? How's Callie? You grew more. Oh, I'm barefoot too, so you're cheating. What's up, man?
Can you hear me now?
How you doing, dude?
Okay, if the sound cuts out, please somebody let me know.
Oh, cool.
Well, thank you all for being here. I'm honored that you are. Thank you to Banyan Books for facilitating this event. I'll be reading from a number of books, most of which I bought at Banyan. And the problem is with me is I'm an addictive personality. If there's such a thing, I have it. And so that means I can get hooked on anything. Now, whenever I run into a spiritual crisis, my way of dealing with it is to go out and buy another spiritual book, and which I don't read. But next time I run into another spiritual mud bath, I go out and buy another book. In fact, I buy several at one time. So Banyan has everything to be grateful for as far as I'm concerned. I'm probably personally responsible for their annual profit, such as it might be. Sataram's little exercise here. What I tell you is like this talk was entitled "Who Are We We're Not Addicted? The Possible Human." I didn't come up with that title. I never would have come up with that title because the answer is I don't know. I just don't know. Possible human. I mean, I don't know that I know. Therefore, I jumped at the chance of giving the talk because there's an opportunity to actually learn something. Rather than giving the same talk or variations on the same themes over, I had a chance to explore something new. And my immediate response to the question, the possible human, would have been, I don't have a clue. But then I realized, well, it's not true I don't have a clue, but that's all I have is some clues. So I'm not going to be answering the question for you tonight as to what the possible human is. At the very most, or at the very best, and that'll have to be good enough, I'll be giving you some clues that I've begun to follow, or at least believe that are worth following to various degrees. But there's no completed answer here. I'll tell you the degree to which there's no completed answer here. When Sataram began her exercises, we're doing this breath, and by the way, I was thinking, like you go to a Catholic church, or people are doing their Christian thing or praying, and what would happen if somebody took a silent film of this audience? what religion is this that they're into? Well, when she's doing her exercise, my mind right away, well, when is this going to be over so I can get on stage? No, I'm not doing that. I'm just sitting there trying to do the exercises. But my mind, the egoic mind, immediately wants what it doesn't have at that moment, which is attention. Which gives you a clue to the nature of the mind, as you know. It's all about the self. I'm talking about the egoic mind. And so that egoic mind has no idea what the possible human is. Or at least it thinks that the possible human is just the wanting something. Now, in this culture, we've made that into an ideology. We've made that into a science. We've made it into a philosophy of life. So that the North American belief, or the belief of any materialistic society, but particularly capitalist society, is that the nature of the human being is to be selfish, to be acquisitive, to be aggressive, and to be competitive. And this is who we actually are. And you know what? Scientists will actually find for you the selfish gene. There's even a book written with that title. Well, that's not science, it's ideology. But it's an emanation of that egoic mind, the same egoic mind that sits there saying, when is it going to be my turn? So, I don't know where this talk's actually going to go. You're just going to have to meander along with me and hope that I cruise through some waters that are worth cruising through, and that we get somewhere at the end that's worth getting to. Let me read you this book I got for free at a conference I went to recently. So I don't know if Banyan has it or not, but it's called the Panchatantra, which is an ancient Sanskrit book of stories. I never heard of it, but apparently it's the most famous book in the world. And it's a series of stories like Canterbury Tales or the Decameron or the Arabian Nights, which is a kind of format where one story follows another. So the format for this book is that there was this king somewhere in ancient India who was a great leader, and his name was Immortal Power, and he had 3 sons who were rather stupid, and he was kind of worried about passing on the kingdom to them, because where will they take it? So he talked to his wise men, who each gave their advice on how these rather obtuse, closed-minded sons can be turned into wise rulers. But all that would have taken many, many years. So finally he hears about a wise man who possibly can do it sooner. And this wise man comes and says, his name is Vishnu Sharma. "O king, listen, here's the plain truth. I'm not the man," and he says, "I don't want your money, I don't want you to pay me land grants, or I don't need your grains, I don't need your money, I'm 80 years old, I'm done with sensual desire. There's nothing you can give me," he says. "But I will teach your sons," he says. "My boasting arises from no greed for cash." He says, "I can do this," he says, "but I'm not boasting," he says. "Besides, I have no use for money. I'm 80 years old, and all the objects of sensual desire have lost their charm. But in order that your request may be granted, I will show a sporting spirit in reference to artistic matters. Make note of the data. If I fail to render your sons in 6 months' time incomparable masters of the art of intelligent living, then His Majesty is at liberty to show me His majestic bare bottom." That's my promise to you. If I don't give you anything tonight, well, in preparation for this talk, as I was preparing to give this talk, somebody, a friend of mine, who I met last summer, sent me a poem by Adyashanti. And Adyashanti is one of the current spiritual masters whose books and DVDs I have bought at Banyan. And I've read 4 pages of one of them, and listened to a number of the CDs. And I love Adyashanti, I just love his presence. how many of you know his work? A few of you do. But somebody sent this poem, and she said, Sunyata, are you here tonight? Yeah, hi. You sent me this? Yeah. And Sunyata sent me this with the message that this is just perfect for your talk. Because this is who we actually are. And so here's a poem by Adyashanti, who says, who are you? And he says, you are beyond the body, mind and personality, beyond all experience and the experiences thereof, beyond the world, etc. Be still and awaken to the realization of who you are. And it talks about your supreme reality, and you're the formless source. And the more I read this, the more infuriated I get, Sunyata. Not at you, but at this message that, and Eckhart Tolle, another great teacher, talks about we're being, and we're not the egoic mind, we're presence. When I hear this stuff, it drives me crazy. Part of me drives me crazy because, on the one hand, something in me recognizes the truth of it, but there's no way I can get there. I've never experienced myself as any of those things. So I thought in preparing this talk, for me to stand up here and give you all these spiritual truths about, when we're not addicted, we're presence. And when we're not addicted, then we're love. And when we're not addicted, then we're wisdom. And we're being. And we're the universe. And we're connection. How sure all that stuff is true? I've never been there. How can I stand here and give you all that stuff? Out of the mouth of an Adyashanti who's had that experience. And I genuinely sense that he has. Those are not cliches. Those are just a reality that he's embodying. But for me to give you those words would be absolutely a lie. So that's not what I can tell you. That's not what I can tell you at all. The only clue I can give you is how perhaps to get there, or at least how to get beyond this egoic mind of ours. Because I very well know that that little mind of mine that jumps around when Sadharam is bringing us into the presence, and that little mind of mine that jumps around all about the self, and it creates a film over my experience of the world. It creates a barrier between myself and the universe, a barrier between myself and my deeper self, a barrier between myself and other people, and a barrier between myself and nature. Karl Marx said that alienation basically has four aspects. We're alienated from nature, we're alienated from our true selves, we're alienated from other people, and we're alienated from our work. So that what we do does not represent who we are. So the nature of the society is that it promotes those alienations. And the mechanism of that alienation is that very egoic mind that in me is extraordinarily prominent and is very much in charge of my mental life. So in this Adyashanti poem, though, there's a clue. It says, be still and awaken to the realization of who you are. Well, be still, he says.
Alright, that almost eats up this memory clip. Oh, I almost went off camera. Nice. But we got that bend and the space between around to the next bend. Now one more crazy bend to go before the final next stretch. So I'm going to cut it here. I'll probably have to do a memory card transfer, so I haven't gotten a larger memory card for the shop. But
I do everything in my power.
I will eventually. So anyway, for the moment, that is it. I'll probably pick up with another session after I get things transferred with more scales.
So people hear me and they applaud.
Okay, before I continue with scales, I'm going to do a little adjusting to her hair and the sky color up here. I'm going to cut in some pink, and her hair I'm going to mix up some Payne's gray and Diox's purple, and make it more lustrous and
being that person who can speak
textural.
the truth.
So here we go.
Like perhaps if I'm at all on my game, I might be doing tonight. That's for you to judge. But then I get addicted to being that person. And when I'm not doing it, the crash invariably comes. Now who creates that? I create it by doing way too much. James mentioned my book on the body, says no. And I tend to believe, somehow there's a belief in here, that I'm immune to what I teach. That I can teach people all this stuff, which is true, that I've learned in the world, but somehow the rules that seem to apply to everybody else, somehow have left me free to be exactly the way my egoic mind wants me to be. No wonder then, I come home and I go through the typical withdrawal of the addict. Depression, irritability, physical pain. So that in dealing with the addiction, we also have to ask is, okay, I may not be the experience, I'm not that experience, but what experiences do I generate for myself that keep me in the experience of addiction? Now, why is it so difficult? Why is it so difficult to get out of these habits? Why is it so hard? Albert Camus in The Plague, a wonderful novel, takes place in Algeria, and it's about a bubonic plague which takes over the city. As you know, it's by a bacillus that is spread by rats. And his Dr. Roux, who is one of the leaders in the fight against the bubonic plague. At the very end of the novel, the plague is beaten back, the city runs, the healthy can start living again, free from the fear of the plague, and everybody's happy. And the last paragraph of the book was very sobering. I believe that Camus may have meant this as an allegory for fascism, but I think it's an allegory for something we should forget about. And so he writes in the last paragraph, and indeed, as he listened to the cries of joy rising from the town, Roux remembered that such joy is always imperiled. He knew what these jubilant crowds did not know, but could have learned from books, that the plague bacillus never dies or disappears for good, that it can lie dormant for years and years in the furniture and linen chests, that it hides its time in bedrooms, cellars, trunks, and bookshelves, and that perhaps the day would come when, for the bane and enlightening of men, it roused up its rats again and sent them forth to die in a happy city. And what he's talking about for me, beyond the possibility of fascism, is also the nature of the egoic human mind, because actually on the political level, fascism is simply the highest representation of the egoic human mind. The fear, the I, the ego. Well, that's the ego inside all of us. And it threatens to come back all the time. The Buddha has this image, a very powerful image, a very disturbing image, of two strong men pulling a weaker one towards an abyss in which they're going to hurl him, casting him to his death. And the weaker man resists and digs his feet into the ground and tries to save himself from perdition, but of course they're stronger than he is. And the Buddha says, those two strong men are habit energies. Are habit energies. They're the ingrained habits of the mind. And that weaker one is ourselves. And those habit energies, just like Camus says that the plague can come back, in the same way those habit energies can assert themselves almost at any time. So it does take vigilance not to be an addict in a society. So there's some truth when the person stands up. I haven't drunk for 40 years, but my name is so-and-so, I'm an alcoholic. As much as I don't like the phrase, there's a truth in it. Because the truth is that the possibility of addictive behavior is still very much within me, and I need vigilance to overcome that. I can never take it for granted that it's totally gone. And so that's just the nature of the human mind, because these habits are ingrained very, very early, and the needs are ingrained ingrained in the brain very, very early. And furthermore, of course, it's in the very nature of the thinking mind. It's difficult, as Michael Braun, who's another writer whose book I bought at Banyan, as he says, it's difficult to think outside the box because the thinking is the box. And that's where the yoga work comes in, is because it gets us outside that thinking mind. So if we have a hard time thinking our way past our addictions, don't worry about it. That's the very nature of the thinking mind. That in itself is a representation of addiction. And it's very self-oriented. As Eckhart Tolle points out, that the structure of the egoic mind is wanting. The wanting is structural. Hi TJ. What we want may change. So what I want may be at a certain time this, shopping for this, or wanting that from the world, or so the content may change, but the wanting is structural. And that's what I mean in my book, Hungry Ghosts, about the addiction process. So that there's a fundamental addiction process. That's the same for every addict. And I define addiction as any behavior that is associated with craving, temporary relief, and an inability to give it up despite negative consequences. But it goes way beyond that. That's the nature of it. Wanting, craving, temporary relief when you get it, and long-term negative consequences. And that's what an addiction is. And that wanting is structural in the egoic mind. No wonder then we have such a problem with addictions in this society, which promotes that, as I'll say in a moment. And Almas has got a wonderful image, funny and maybe disturbing at the same time. Basically all just babies wanting a tit to suck on, he says. We look at every other human being as a tit. And we're wondering, where's the nipple? And is it big enough? Does it contain enough milk for me? And will I like the milk? Or will it turn sour? Is it going to make me feel good, or will it give me a tummy ache? Or is the tip too big and will it smother me? So he says, basically all human beings, we're all like a bunch of tits walking around looking for the nipple. Well, again, that's just another way of saying what Tolle also says, is that the wanting is structural. So that when you say to yourself, I'm an addict, well, no, you're not. You're a human being. You're a human being. The degree of your wanting, of course, is related to the degree of emptiness that you experience, and that the degree of emptiness that you experience is very much related to what happened to you very early in life. And before I go there, let me just also say that, again, it's not a personal problem, it's in the very nature of the world. And in the Tibetan Book of Living and Dying, the Sogyal Rinpoche says that the greatest achievement, he says, over Western civilization, he says, the greatest achievement of modern culture, he says, is the brilliant selling of samsara. Samsara meaning the Sanskrit term for suffering. So the greatest achievement of our culture, he says, is the brilliant selling of suffering. And its barren distractions. Modern society seems to me, he says, a celebration of all the things that lead away from truth, make truth hard to live for, and discourage people even from believing it exists. So that the very culture we live in denies that there's truth, makes people hungry, hurts people, leaves them isolated, therefore empty, therefore wanting satisfaction from the outside, therefore addicted, and then it creates all these products and all these activities and all these cultural diversions to fill the very emptiness that it creates. And then they say that selfishness is the nature of human beings. And there's the complete circle of the ideology. Well, as Eckhart points out, that every addiction arises from an unconscious refusal to face and move through your own pain. Every addiction starts with pain and ends with pain. And as I've often said, in the downtown east side, where I worked for 10 years, I hardly met any woman, and really maybe one, I remember meeting one, who said she had not been sexually abused, everybody else had been. So that the greater the pain, the greater the addiction. And that pain always goes way, way back. There's a very interesting relationship between the word attachment and the word attachment. In Buddhist terms, attachment is the craving and the holding on to things in an unhealthy way. We're attached to our possessions, we're attached to our looks, we're attached to all the things that are passing and evanescent, temporary, and unsatisfying. And that's what creates suffering, is the attachment.
Contrast now from the rest
so there's
of
that word attachment in the Buddhist sense.
Stand out.
Then there's the word attachment in the modern psychological sense.
Touch it with a few
attachment
highlights
means
to
love.
accentuate the purple.
Attachment
But for the
means
moment,
the drive to be close to somebody in order to be taken care of,
18
or in order to
minutes.
take care of. So that in my book with Gordon Neufeld on Hold On to Your Kids, about the need for children to attach to parents, and then what happens when that attachment is lost, we're talking about attachment in a positive sense. It's very interesting that the same word is used, because the reality is, the less you have of that positive attachment, the more you're going to have of that negative attachment. So the degree to which you attach to food, the degree to which you attach to substances, the degree to which you attach to attention, the degree to which you attach to television, any external behavior. And as somebody said, all addictions are ways of trying to get from the outside, trying to solve your problems from the outside. So the more attached you are to getting something from the outside, the more it means that you never had in the first place the attachment in the positive sense. So addiction, there's no big, again, the profession and thinkers and so on, they make a big mystery out of addiction. What is this all about? Why would people do these things to themselves which hurt them and destroy them and blight the lives of the children and their families? There's no big mystery about it. The less attachment you had, the less your attachment needs were met as a child, the more attached you're going to be to getting it from the outside. And you might get it through relationships. So for example, you might never have a substance addiction in your whole life, but you just might be a nice person. And you're a nice person all the time because you need to be liked. Why did you ever need to be liked? Because you did not get your attachment needs met. You were not accepted for who you were. You were not loved for who you were. Therefore, in order to get love, this song, you might as well face it, you're addicted to love. Well, that's the nature of the society. A lot of us are addicted to love, and a lot of us will contort ourselves into pretzels in order to get that love. So some people are very, very nice, and they make themselves very, very nice. So nice they end up getting cancer. And that cancer is very much a manifestation of not having been loved in the first place, and therefore they suppress themselves in order to be liked, and that self-suppression ends up suppressing their immune system. That again is a whole other conversation, but that too comes from the need to get something from the outside. So the less we had that attachment given to us in the first place, the more we try and crave it and try and get it from the outside, which is the very nature of addiction. So at the heart of addiction there's loss and there's pain. And what is the nature of that pain? And Eckhart says that basically all emotions are modifications of one primordial, undifferentiated emotion that has its origin in the loss of awareness of who you are. And so that the big loss is not that your mother didn't love you, or your father didn't love you the way, or even that they abused you. That's not the big loss for any of us. And so, in my work, although it's important to understand happened to people as children, it's not sufficient. It doesn't matter how many times you go through the trauma that you experienced as a 5-year-old, whether you're abused or mistreated or what. It doesn't matter, because that wasn't your big problem. As Alma says really eloquently, he says, the fundamental thing that happened, and the greatest calamity, is not that there was no love or support. The greater calamity, which was caused by that first calamity, is that you lost the connection to your essence. That is much more important than whether your mother or father love you or not. So the big thing then is not to focus on what happened externally and how do I get that from the outside, but how do I reconnect to myself? And that reconnection to the self doesn't happen through here. Because if it happened through here, boy, I'd be the most enlightened person in the world. Because I've thought about this, and I've thought about this, and I've thought about this. And I've written about it. And people write to me, they do. Thank you, your book changed my life. I'm thinking maybe I should read it myself. Because thinking about it, and even talking about it, and teaching it, and helping other people get there, doesn't get me there. Because you can only get there in here. You can only get there through the body. You can only get there at the very core of your being. So there's nothing out there. There's nothing I'm going to say. There's nothing else anybody else is going to say that's going to get you there. All the teachers tell you that. And all anybody can give you is just clues. So I hope I've given you some clues tonight. But let me finish with a quote which, you know, as it says in the Tibetan Book of Living and Dying, so whatever you do, don't shut off your pain, accept your pain, and remain vulnerable. All these things we do to get away from pain, like being nice, or doing substances. Don't shut off your pain. However desperate you become, accept your pain as it is, because it is in fact trying to hand you a precious gift, the chance of discovery through spiritual practice what lies behind sorrow. And don't we know, he says, and only far too well, that protection from pain doesn't work, and that when we try and defend ourselves from suffering, we only suffer more, and that we don't learn what we can from experience. Or as Alma says, the surest way to get to hell is to resist going to hell. But I also know this. Do I know it? I do know it. Do I embody it all the time? Or much of the time? No, I don't. Do I know it? Yes, I do. And there's a deeper knowing that just says aha to something. And I'm sure that
10 minutes. I'm going to zoom into that part. That's pretty excruciatingly
and this is
small
the possibility of being human.
Detail there.
And the Buddha said, he talked about the interconnection of all things.
Zoom in, I got his eyes bugging out, staring at a figure
during every
which yet to be placed. But
when you look at a leaf or a raindrop,
sense in a
meditate
couple
on all
of
the
months.
conditions here in this.
This one's going to take a minute.
Contributed to the presence of a leaf or
But
raindrop.
for the moment,
Know that the
scale
world
up.
is woven of interconnected strands.
10 minutes left. Go.
This is because that is. This is not because that is not. This is born because that is born. This dies because that dies. The birth and death of any dharma or any phenomena, he means in this sense, are connected to the birth and death of all other phenomena. The one contains the many, and the many contains the one. Without the one, there cannot be the many, and without the many, there cannot be the one. So that sense of connection with which Sadharam ended her exercise is also where I would like to leave you. Because I know that I'm really talking to brothers and sisters. I know that every single one of you have experienced that dancing monkey of the egoic mind. I know that it's been active in many of you, even during this conversation. And why shouldn't it be? That's the nature of it. But I also know that doesn't make you into an addict. It just means that that's the experience that you're having. And I also know that the sense of connection that Sadharam's exercise encouraged in us, when we're able to be still and we're able to pay attention to what's actually there, then that sense of connection isn't just an idea, it's actually a reality way beyond the separation that the mind would otherwise impose. Thank you very much.
Thought that I would come to Chapman College in Orange County for this. My mind just can't grok it. I can't get it all together. The climate must have changed when I wasn't looking. Boy, if this climate existed back in the 60s, Harvard could really be swinging today. Huh. You know, this audience in particular, I can say to you, there are so many levels on which we could share. You know, we could just sit here silently for about a half hour and probably have the essence of the wisdom. Because obviously, well, it's obvious to me, I don't really know a hell of a lot more about all this than you do. And those of you that have heard my lectures know that I use my first name Ram as an acronym for rent-a-mouth. And basically I just think of myself as a mouth that speaks what we are trying to figure out and understand. And because when I say something that's about as wise as I get, I look out and a lot of people going like that. And I think, how do they know? And if they know, why am I up here saying it? I particularly like speaking to very conservative groups, where I'm introduced with everything except psychedelics. You know, he was at Harvard and then he did research on consciousness and went to India and what happened? Something's missing, you know? I get up and I say the most significant single event of my life happened on March 6, 1961, when Tim Leary gave me psilocybin. And I can feel that the lips get very tight. And I say I've taken it hundreds of times since then, LSD and all of the mishpacha. And so you must assume that that anybody that's done that must be psychotic. But I would point out that you paid to come and hear me. It's like what goes around comes around. That when I was a professor at Harvard, I was a good guy. Then I was fired from Harvard for turning on people. And I was a bad guy. And then I became a yogi, and I was a crazy guy. And then slowly I've done service work all these years.
That's getting into the bend around the next part of the wet lemon yellow, which is going to be slow and tricky
running through a
compared to the rest,
minefield
which
of the
was so smooth and
perceptions of
easy.
other people.
I'm going to cut it here for a minute and come back to it.
Yourself.
Alright, scale on. I'm going to see if I can get up to the
And the reason I'm calling it technology is because I really think sometimes
and get
we
those
find
redone as
technology
well
by a laptop,
in
a
this
mobile
session,
phone,
so
or even listen
give
to
it a
this
stab.
podcast. But maybe if some form of intelligence was trying to communicate with us, it wouldn't necessarily have to be in the form of a radio. Maybe it could be another technology in the form of DMT. If you're not familiar with DMT, it is so fascinating. It exists in some form in every plant and animal, including our own human vessel. But due to our own inner chemistry, we usually don't access it. But if you expose yourself to DMT, many people talk about how it sends you down a wormhole into another large reality, into another dimension, another world, whatever you want to call it. Rick is certainly a big pioneer in the research of DMT.
I'm not gonna risk it, dude. If I crack the glass, I'd feel too bad. I might bring in another fan.
He doesn't really know anything about it. But before we jump into this podcast, also please don't forget to leave a review of the podcast and just let us know what you think. So anyway guys, without further ado, this is a great episode. Dr. Rick Strassman. Well, Rick, I'd just like to say welcome onto the podcast.
Well, thanks for having me on today.
Yeah, definitely. We're both huge admirers of your so important research, and a point I wanted to bring up to start this as well, Rick, and I've thought about as well, I think that we're living in a time where information is so accessible and it's everywhere as well, and it's so easy for us to develop this false sense of how much we really know, and maybe this is due to the fact that we're now getting to a point in time where, in our human evolution as well, where we believe all the answers to our questions are just like a few clicks on Google. But with all this information at our fingertips that can be accessed at any time, I was thinking maybe it's possible that it has become harder to accept not knowing.
Well, I think there's as much misinformation about really fundamental issues out there as there is, sort of a true understanding of what the issues are. Yeah, and I think it relates to what you're referring to. It's just so easy to get information, but sometimes it's hard to determine, its quality.
I think as well, Rick, DMT, it serves as this powerful reminder that we know nothing at all, and maybe that is one of the reasons DMT does exist, because it's needed to give us this powerful reminder that we do know nothing. But apart from that, Rick, the $1 billion question is, why do you think it exists?
Well, I think it exists because it possesses the properties that it does. It has certain effects. And it's, the right molecule for the right function. It would depend on your worldview in some ways, but, starting with the fact that DMT has certain effects on consciousness makes you think that is the reason it exists. So what are those effects on consciousness?
Yeah.
And one can sort of place that in an evolutionary context, a psychological context, a spiritual context, and within the spiritual context, you could even subdivide that into the Eastern or the Western, spiritual models, the inwardness of spiritual information, or the external nature of those spiritual realms. What I've been thinking the last few years is that DMT stimulates the imagination, and by imagination I'm not referring to things made up, but things which we are able to perceive, sensory, emotional, physical kinds of phenomena, as opposed, to the intellect, which, deals with abstract ideas, abstract things. So what seems to occur with DMT is that it stimulates the, the vocabulary of the imagination, or the phenomenology of the imagination. So it isn't as if that, with without a well-developed intellect to understand what those contents of the imagination contain, the information contained in those imaginative contents, then it's just a trip. It's interesting, it's visual, it's emotional, it's even inspiring, but one, I think, needs to also develop the ability to interpret what you're seeing in a state of heightened imaginative activity. So I think to some extent that helps explain the varying degrees of impact that a psychedelic experience has on people.
Yeah, definitely. It's like, for me, it's like the planet needed a way of communicating with us in a strange way, and it placed DMT in all plants and all humans and all animals.
Right. It definitely seems to be a conduit of communication. It seems to be a means by which things that we're normally not aware of enter into our minds.
Yeah, definitely. I think as well, Rick, the connection of DMT and in the connection with all species as well on the planet is so fascinating. And I know that your research has uncovered that potentially that every living organism in the world has DMT in it potentially. And if that is the case, this new age idea of being fully connected holds true, that we are connected by this one simple molecule, and it could be this common molecular language that we really could communicate or even create with as well.
Well, I think that's a possibility, yeah. I mean, I sometimes like to refer to DMT as a spiritual Esperanto, kind of a, common language that is, which is, shared by all organisms which contain DMT. I'm not sure if every living creature contains DMT, but, so far it's been discovered to exist in every mammal that's been examined, and hundreds, if not thousands, of plants. But it could be that some organisms contain it and some don't. But it's still an open area of investigation.
Yeah, definitely. I was wondering as well, all the studies that you've done on DMT, were they all carried out in a lab environment?
Yeah. The results, the stories, the narratives, the case reports that I describe in my DMT book were all carried out, during the performance of the research study at the University of New Mexico back in the 1990s.
Yeah. I was just because, Rick, I was just wondering if there was a difference between nature versus a laboratory environment.
Well, even though the first-hand or close to first-hand reports that I emphasize in my DMT book come from the laboratory study. I'm getting emails all the time from people who describe their DMT and ayahuasca experiences to me, and I don't think that the laboratory environments influence to a great degree the nature of people's experiences. Sometimes sometimes people point out to me that perhaps the description of being in a laboratory or a highly technological environment that my volunteers reported was a function of their being in the hospital. But if you read accounts about ayahuasca experiences which occur in the jungle, there are encounters with aliens, with highly over-technological societies and species, creatures, flying saucers, laboratories, things like that. So I think one of the interesting things about DMT is because it works so quickly, that it's more of a pure pharmacological effect. with the longer acting, psychedelic, substances, you have more time to interact with the experience. Your expectations, I think, play more of a role in what you're perceiving. But I think with DMT, the fact that you're there in 1 or 2 heartbeats, it makes it very hard to kind of modify the contents of the experience. I think you just bring your own personality, your own brain, your own expectations into the session, to only a certain degree. Otherwise, I think it's just the pure activation of wherever in the brain DMT is working, and then you're thrust into wherever DMT seems to lead you.
Yeah, and I like that breakdown there, Rick. I like how you said that. But Rick, have you looked at like the functionality of DMT inside of say plants versus animals?
Well, with respect, to the botanical, presence or properties of DMT, I haven't really looked into that very much. Dennis McKenna is kind of the world's expert on botanical DMT and related compounds. But primarily, I ran my study in humans, and I'm a lot more current on the animal literature.
Rick, I was wondering as well, I think I heard you mention before as well, in another statement that you made, was talking about that the human function of the brain requires DMT for normal function. And you were talking about how maybe DMT is actually mediating our perception of the natural world. Is that true?
Well, yeah, I mean, that's a possibility which is raised by the fact that DMT is actively transported into the brain across the blood-brain barrier using energy. And there's only a very small number of compounds that the brain treats that way. Things which are critical for its function, which it's not able to make on its own. Things like glucose, for energy, specific amino acids for protein synthesis, which the brain isn't able to make on its own. So DMT is one of those compounds that the brain expends energy to get into its confines. So that would make you, wonder, well, why does the brain need DMT? And, the most obvious answer is that DMT helps, regulate, consensus reality, as it were, as a result of existing within the brain within a narrow, window of concentration. One of the expressions I like to use about DMT within that context is that it may function as a kind of reality thermostat. That concentrations, if they get too high in the brain, become strange, and if concentrations become too low, they become maybe flat and dull. So it may be the case that the brain requires the maintenance of a certain narrow window of DMT levels. What's also interesting is more recently a group in Wisconsin has discovered high levels of the enzyme and the gene activation responsible for that enzyme making DMT in the primate retina, eye. So it also, may be, more specifically that, DMT is mediating our perception of the visual world as well.
Well, I was just going to say, it's kind of like when DMT, strips away, the brain's filter on reality, really, isn't it?
Well, I'm not sure if it strips it away as, much as maybe, generating it. It may be generating or at least mediating it. Well, the movie's Matrix, where everything is a computer-generated reality. You can even, think about, DMT as an endomatrix. It's the naturally occurring matrix, which gives appearance, gives form, to the world as we normally perceive it. Which makes you wonder what would happen if you could do a knockout species or knockout organisms which no longer make DMT. Like for example, if you could engineer a rodent to have no more DMT, you could blockade the gene responsible for the enzyme that makes DMT. What would the consciousness of that animal be experiencing? So yeah, it starts to get a little strange when you think about DMT as generating our perception of the world. Because it makes you wonder why that's the case. And it also makes you wonder if our current if our current consensus reality is a DMT mediated hallucination. What does that have to say about about cause and effect and free will and our sense of solidity, morality, interactions with people and the environment. So it opens up a whole can of epistemological worms, as it were.
Yeah, it kind of affects nearly everything, really, doesn't it? The whole DMT, it really looks into all aspects of reality and beyond, and that's why I think it's so interesting that it kind of does change the way our perception views of what we are looking at through ourselves, and it does rip this built mechanism way, and it seems to allow us to go beyond the self.
Well, I think it allows us to go beyond our normal understanding of the self. It certainly provides the access to tap into things which we don't normally perceive. I'm not sure if it is if it's going beyond the self as perhaps more of an expansion of the self.
Yeah, definitely. I think as well with that expansion of the self as well. I think something that came to my mind there, it was activating the senses, and I think we know about the senses that's been documented, and I really think there's certain other things that we can do or take, to activate other senses, and maybe DMT is one of them.
It stimulates the imagination, and the imagination is the repository of sensory data, and especially visual. So and I think that the presence of the gene in the retina that makes DMT points to the importance of DMT and the sensory mechanisms of humans and other animals. It's interesting you were asking about the presence of DMT in plants, and we usually don't think about plants as perceiving, especially with sense organs. So even if DMT in plants provides a means of communication, kind of makes you wonder if perhaps plants are also perceiving, but it's occurring at a different level or in a different way than we're normally used to thinking about such things.
Yeah, I think that's really interesting how you said that, because I think there's intelligence in plants that we don't fully understand. We really don't. But I think as well, something I want to touch on here as well is DMT and the connection to unlocking DNA. And I actually heard Dennis...
Alright, gonna have to cut it there, it's raining. I gotta...
helpful. I think it can be turned
well,
one
shit.
way or the other depending on...
This camera's got kind of an odd trick when it goes to sleep, and sometimes it doesn't click on when I hit the record button the first time. And I just did a 15-20 minute session there without being on camera. So apologies for missing that portion. But as you can see, I've added a sky blue, cutting the edge of that mountain and fading into the deeper blue. It also highlights these mountains in the black hole. And other than that, we just finished the scales. eyes that are looking on a figure that's not there yet, but they will be. And now that the scale line work is done, I'm going to start filling each one with the various colors, and we'll turn that into a road and then populate that road with translucent figures for anyone that's following this that doesn't know the plot of the intention of what's being aimed at here. So it's going to take a long time, but I like the development of it thus far. Her face took a good step today in the right direction, starting to look a little more model, a little less flat and wonky. So that's good. Hands, little progress.
Extremely
that one's still pretty mechanical. We need some work. That all needs work. So anyway, we'll pick it up tomorrow, but that's it for the moment. So thank you for watching. That's Adam Sturch, broadcasting from the Mushroom Mansion. From the Garage Art today, Taos, New Mexico, between Allsup's and Outback Pizza, working on oil painting. Here we are. Have a good day, Rick.